Ka-isturyaHANNAhy. Let's talk about what I learned in therapy. Ever since my eyes were open to the world of mental health, I always wanted to see a therapist, but never found a reason to go to one. I never found a need to or a justifying reason to go to one. I acknowledge the fact and know in my heart and soul that every single person can benefit from going to therapy. But again, I couldn't justify going to one. I didn't feel an urgent need to go to one. And considering the high cost of seeing a therapist as well, I felt like I wanted to ensure that I get my money's worth and see one when something is quote unquote wrong. And this has been going on for years. Finally, in 2022, I somewhat made a move to book a therapist. I found her through a tweet of a high school acquaintance. And although I personally know of a few people who see a therapist or go to a therapist, seeing this particular person open up about seeing someone gave me the courage to not to book the appointment just yet, but reach out to her and see who she went to, since I felt that based on her tweet that we were on the same boat. Mind you, I still didn't book the session even after that exchange with her. Finally, something happened during work. I was extremely burnt out and have been for quite some time. However, it came to a point where right after I ended a work call, I took off my headphones, I put it on my table, I pushed my chair back, I got up, went to the back of my house, propped to the floor, and I screamed and yelled in the middle of the night. I just bawled and bawled for minutes on, and it seemed like this was the first time in forever that I've cried this much. I don't remember the last time that I cried this intensely. Luis, my fiance, was awake at the time, and he has not, in the span of 15 years that we have known each other, 14 years of that we've been in a relationship, he has not seen me that way, or at least the way that he reacted, it seemed like he has never seen me that way. So he reached out to a close friend of mine who was also my co-worker at the time regarding the outburst and let her know. He didn't know what to do. He is not equipped at all to handle what just happened. I mean, I didn't even cry to the same extent when my father passed. To be fair, my father's demise was kind of an impending doom and very much something that we saw coming, while this burst and explosion of emotions was unexpected. Although, in hindsight, it's been a long time coming. I had a post-breakdown clarity and spoke to my supervisor and let her know that unfortunately, I'm no longer confident in my abilities to continue with my duties in the role because it has taken quite a toll on me. I knew that I could do the job, I'm capable, but every time before I clock in, I'd get an anxiety attack, and every time I clock out, I count the hours until I clock back in again and just get anxious all over again. She was aware that I have been frustrated for quite some time, but I was the one who wasn't ready to bring it up to the higher ups, and I didn't want to do anything rash until I fully knew that I just couldn't handle it anymore. And well, that time came. Thankfully, my clients were gracious enough to keep me around and switch me over to a different department. It did, however, take a while for me to be able to switch over, since they still needed to find a replacement for me. I was on cloud 9 at the time, just waiting to be transitioned over. I still felt anxious clocking in, don't get me wrong, but I finally felt like I can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I actually enjoyed my days off. So I often went out on date nights with Louise when this happened, and on one of those nights, we watched Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. I realized that as exceptional as Wanda was, she was pushed to the edge, and I resonated with her, and I saw that as a sign, so I booked my appointment with the therapist. When I had my session, I was quote-unquote stable, since I was already content in knowing that I would be transferred over to a different department. I was avoiding a repeat of that episode. I still am. So I saw that session, or was looking at that session, as some sort of maintenance, if you will. And to be frank, I felt very invalidated with the therapist that I saw. I brought up issues and symptoms of possible mental health concerns, but she dismissed them. And well, I didn't want to waste the session because, again, it's expensive. So I decided to just make the most of it. She acknowledged how self-aware I was, and honestly, I wasn't surprised. No, it's because I knew that I was, because I was and still am addicted to learning and self-improvement. That's the reason why I was seeing her in the first place. I knew my faults, I just didn't know how to fix or work with them long enough that I wouldn't become a complete mess. She assumed that my frustrations with work was because I didn't feel that I was enough. So she went through questions regarding self-esteem, and although I know I'm not the absolute best human being in the world, I also know that I'm not the worst, or I'm far from the worst. And I don't know if that's just an arrogant way of saying I love myself and I know my worth. So I know that this was not the cause of my issue. I love myself. I love and accept who I am. I know I'm capable, but I also love myself enough to want to know more about myself and become a better person. I love myself. I knew that I did. I know that I did. People around me know that I didn't have issues with self-love and my self-esteem. So I couldn't figure out what was wrong. We then chatted more about why I booked the session, or more accurately, what pushed me to finally click that book an appointment button. I shared stuff about work, shared how it was for me growing up. I told her that I was an overachiever, that I was always at the top of my class, but I fell off that wagon when I got to college. However, again, because I have so much self-esteem, that I didn't care about that particular one, since not only was I aware of what I was doing in college, but it was intentional. Instead, I took pride in my work and my work ethics. So that's where my perfectionism bled into the most. I told her that my parents never did push me or pressure me to have the top spot in class. It just kind of happened when I was little, and it just kind of became a consistent thing. So me wanting to do my best was purely self-inflicted. My therapist then told me something so simple, but it entirely shook me to my core, that I needed to be kind and gentle to myself. I even have "be kind" in my social media bios, so it felt like one of those "it was in front of me all along" moments. Granted, I meant that we should all be kind to one another, but I never even thought, it never crossed my mind that we should be that way to our own selves. I love myself, yes, but when I do anything unintentionally wrong, I beat myself up over it. I expect so much from myself, and nobody's asking me to do anything or be anything. It's 100% self-inflicted. I realized how I fully didn't embody self-love, since being kind and gentle to myself is another form of self-love, and I'm light years and light years away from perfecting that. Even as I say that now, it still has a tinge of perfectionism and toughness. Nobody said I had to perfect being kind to myself, but my mind just instinctively goes there. Like I said, light years away from being kind to myself. I didn't grow up in an affectionate home, so tough love made me who I am today, and that is a double-edged sword. I've grown strong and tough, resistant to those outside who try to bring me down, but also strong and tough to myself, the only person, the only one who can bring myself down. In the friend group, I'm known to dish out tough love, sometimes even temporarily ended friendships because of how harsh I could be when they weren't ready to hear what needed to be said. What they don't know, or maybe don't expect even, is that I am as tough, if not more, to myself than I am with them. And unlike them, I can't get away from me. It's highly difficult to bring myself to forgive myself for shortcomings. I'm self-aware enough to know that I am far from perfect, so those shortcomings are easy to brush off. But if I fall short of the things that I not only know that I'm good at, but I excel in, it feels shattering. It feels like a huge slap to my face. And is anybody mad that I made a mistake? No, just me. Like, it's just the epitome of, it's me. Hi, I'm the problem, it's me. It's a work in progress, but at least it's progress. I didn't get any tips on how to be kind to myself, or maybe I just didn't listen well enough because I was too preoccupied with the epiphanies going through my head about being kind and gentle to myself. But I did learn something about myself, which is an added layer of self-awareness, which I am all for. And because of that, even though I felt dismissed and invalidated, I still gave this therapist another chance and booked another session. As most would say, finding your therapist is just like dating, so you also need to find someone that meshes well with you, but it doesn't take one session, so again, that's why I gave her another chance. The day before my second session, I had another breakdown. I was a complete mess. I believe at the time I was contemplating on adding another client to my roster, and at the time, I recently realized that I need someone else to bounce off ideas with, or at least listen to what I had to say before making a huge decision. I don't feel like it was a typical seeking validation sort of thing, more so just feeling the need to get more opinions, to get a bigger point of view, and, two heads are better than one type of thing. So I invited my closest friends over for some brainstorming. One of them wasn't in town, so she couldn't make it, but I did wait the whole afternoon for the ones that were here. They didn't arrive until 8 or 9 p.m. that night. I didn't hear from one of them, while the other, who lived near me, didn't want to come over until the other was already here. But I knew that there was something rational that made the other person not come over, or kind of just didn't notify me or anything like that. But I'm human, so I just totally broke down. I took a hot shower and I just cried and cried and cried. I felt let down and brushed aside. Friendships aren't transactional and conditional, but I was crying out how much I have and would continue to bend over backwards for them. And I just needed their ears, but they let me down. So I just sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. It did turn out okay in the end. I just needed to feel my feelings, as they say, and I honestly was absolutely cathartic. So I recapped this to my session, or during my session. She was concerned whether I felt less than because of that, and she was glad to know that them showing up late didn't make me feel that way. Maybe it was odd to her, but again, oozing with self-love and self-esteem over here. I honestly didn't feel anything was wrong with me. My mind didn't typically go to, what am I missing or lacking that they aren't showing up for me? Which is honestly the typical or common reaction. I instead went, why couldn't they show up for me as I do for them? Which is less focused on what I lack and leans more on expecting reliability from them. I also am aware enough that I can't expect that people love and act the same way that I love and act. That just isn't the way the world works. So, because I knew that, but I still felt disappointed, I instead asked her how to handle disappointment. I honestly didn't get an answer to that now that I think about it, or at least not a tip or an answer that directly addresses my concern. So my second session didn't necessarily teach me anything new, but it did remind me and open my eyes about how my control issues are deeper and at a bigger level than what I thought they were at. Unsurprisingly, my control issues and anxiety are interconnected. At least for me, they are. I'm forever worrying and anxious about things in the future because I don't have full control of the outcome of whatever life may bring or throw at me. And growing up, I realized how I personally didn't have a single chance of living an anxiety-free life. Both my parents are anxious in different and valid ways, and that just passed on to me. So when I can't control a situation that I want to take control of, I malfunction. I'm fine with not having control over things that I don't have my hands in. So it's things that I can do something about and care enough to do something about that affect me when it does go wrong. So my therapist told me to avoid expectations. Her tidbit for handling disappointment is avoiding expectations. Very cliche, I know. However, that honestly just doesn't help me at all. It makes sense, but it doesn't help me personally. She didn't add anything more on how to avoid expectations. I honestly am pretty good with avoiding expectations, I feel like, as my anxiety covers the worst case scenario. So I'm prepared for that most of the time. One of the things that I live by is to expect for the best and prepare and plan for the worst. So it's very pessimistically optimistic, and come to think of it, very much rooted in anxiety. Again, it's just the root of everything for me. So although it's expectation of the best, there's still room for expecting the worst and everything else in between. So that advice didn't help me, but I still got something out of that session. So it wasn't a waste of time. And maybe her method does work for others, just not for me. I haven't booked a session with her since then, although to be fair, she had a couple of months off and I was transferred over to a different department, so I haven't had any episodes, no huge triggers, so I didn't feel the urgent need to see a therapist again. So I'm back to that. Although my experience isn't top notch, I still fully believe that seeing a therapist does a great deal to anyone and everyone. And I still learn from her, so not a waste at all. And I just had 2 sessions. I'm still shopping around for another therapist, just not actively because, again, I don't have an urgent need to just yet. And I do honestly have a bunch on my plate for the foreseeable future. If you do have any recommendations, I feel like I would benefit a lot from a therapist that's more focused on anxiety and possible ADHD. So, but definitely on anxiety. Let me know, hit me up, recommend. If you've had any experience with seeing a therapist, good or bad, do let me know and share it to the class. I would love to talk about it because, again, I don't really have a lot of experience with it personally. So I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. Thank you so much for listening and or watching. If you're on Spotify, don't forget to follow, like, and rate. If you're on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe and give this a like. If you can, share this episode or any episode of mine. It will help me immensely and I would truly appreciate it. Ka-isturyaHANNAhy ta. Let's talk on the next episode.